You're sure?
Yeah. Mine only class two. Yeah, two. So.
Yeah, I was like outside at like 6:30, so it was dark. You want it? No, I do a facilities building, which is across. It's by CBTC. So.
Wait, so did we actually find?
You want the 6:30?
Not at 6:30, I was outside like 6:50.
All right, welcome everyone. Just as an announcement, tomorrow in class, we will have time for you to consult with your groups and make sure everybody's on board with what type of hypothesis tests, confidence intervals, and graphs are most appropriate for each of your variables. So please work on steps 3 through 6 of the final project before class tomorrow, and have something written down to show me and show your group that you've been thinking about it. At this point, it does not need to be readable by anybody but you, but have something written down so you have a starting point for your discussion with your group tomorrow. Are there questions about the final project? Here's up.
Are we supposed to submit it as on Canvas?
No, you do not need to submit them. If you're going to be absent, then maybe not.
So we don't have to put in
Step. For tomorrow, just bring them and I will check them at the start of class, same as I do with your notes. If you bring your computer, then you can show me on your computer, that works too. There.
We each have a different research question, right?
Yes. So if your variables are the same type, then you may all be using the same type of hypothesis test. But if you have different types of variables, then you may be doing different types of hypothesis tests. And that's fine. Tomorrow you can discuss about that and make sure that you agree with the types of tests that your group mates have decided to use. Any other questions about the final project? All right. Any questions about the homework? Allison.
Can we do problems for
Homework
homework 19?
19.
Number 9.
Number 9. Okay. So here we're given some data on the number of alcoholic drinks that students at UVA consumed. And we want a 96.1% confidence interval for the difference in means of the number of drinks that females had minus the mean of the number of drinks that males had. So there are sort of 2 approaches to this. And for both of them, I would start by entering the data either into your calculator or into the descriptive statistics applet. So if you enter them into one variable statistics on your calculator, so you'll be going to start up Word. Stat, edit, and enter data. So you could use, say, L1 for the females and L2 for the males. Then you could use stat calc 1var stats and find the sample mean X bar and S sub x for each group. Then you would go to stat tests, and here we are looking at a quantitative variable and a binary categorical grouping variable. And we want to know whether there's an association there by looking at the confidence interval. So if this were a hypothesis test, let's say we wanted to test whether the average number of drinks was associated with gender identity, what type of test would we be considering? Right? Yeah, 2 sample t-tests. So that means that for a confidence interval, we want the 2 samp t int. And then you do input stats, and you put in the results that you got from the one variable statistics. That's option 1. The other option, I guess option 1B, would be if you wanted to use input stats, but didn't want to use one variable statistics for some reason, then you could get these same values, x bar and s sub x, from the descriptive statistics applet. That's option 1B. Option 2 is after you've entered the data, skip the step of using one variable statistics, go directly to the 2 sample t interval, but this time choose input data. And then it'll ask you which lists contain the data, and you put in L1 and L2, the lists where you stored the data. Allison, does that address your question?
Yes.
Cool. Other questions about the homework?
For the same homework thing, could you do 1E?
1E.
Yeah.
Okay. So here we're testing whether husbands tend to be older than their wives in opposite sex married couples. And part E is asking us about the p-value. And this isn't asking us for the number, the numerical value of the p-value. Instead, it's asking us to define what the p-value is in the context of this data set. So the p-value is going to be a probability of getting a result in the sample. So in this case, a difference of the means or a mean of the differences. So this is asking about, here we're doing a paired test because we have data from one husband matches up with the data from one wife. That those data come in pairs. So that means that our samples are not independent, and we can get better power by treating them as paired. So our null hypothesis is going to be that mu sub d equals 0. So in other words, we're looking at the mean of the differences. So mu sub d the mean of the difference. Which order are we doing the subtractions problem? Let's look at the data. Nope. There we go. Chapter 7. Let's see, it looks like husbands are listed first in this data set. So we're going to be subtracting husband minus wife. So in other words, first, we're taking the difference within each couple, and then we're taking the average. So our statistic is that same thing, but in the sample. So this is going to be like X bar sub D is the mean of the differences in the sample. And we want the probability of getting a mean of the differences in the sample that's greater than or equal to what we got in the data. So the entry in this box, this third box, is going to be whatever the mean of the differences was in this actual data set. Which you can see in the applet, sort of at the bottom of the left-hand side. It'll give you the observed mean of the differences. And when we compute a p-value, what are we assuming? The null hypothesis is true. And in this case, the null hypothesis is that the mean of the differences is 0. Allison, does that address your question?
Yeah.
All right. Other questions about the homework? All right. So in the video for today, you saw how to do a paired t-test, so a theory-based paired test of paired study design. Do you have any questions about that? All right, let's give it a try. So this is a study that was done at Vanderbilt about whether 2 different ways of auctioning off Magic the Gathering playing cards give different prices. So giving you control of the computers. For anyone who is watching this recording later, this is the comparing auctions activity.
Yeah, it's the same.
Yeah, same card.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so it's kind of like, oh, you see.
Yeah, that's sure.
You did.
So it is.
Yeah.
Is this?
It's like,
Yeah. And then you. No, I know.
Oh, yeah, it's long. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not, see.
so which one's fine?
Yeah. You're gonna say something about how much we can.
Oh, yeah. There was like, if we would have.
Yeah, I would just say. What is this? Just one. It's like it's money operations. They don't cause each other, but it's like if they were not.
Probably should look at the
Then they would not say. Well, I mean, they already gave us the sample.
That's true, it does say it.
So I mean, I'm assuming that it's.
Selling the same card.
Yeah.
So. we have
But at least that one. Unless we're like really skewed. Like that's probably.
It's really great. And then
I was like.
wait, so it's because like we did that.
That's okay, what's the like? Oh, the sample came through.
Venus 0.381.
Oh, okay.
Is there any questions? Of the, we're talking.
No, that makes sense. Sorry, I just like surprised, but it's okay. It does, even the problem.
Point system.
I was just surprised. Yeah, we're connected to the. Gotcha. Okay, use calculator.
Which is greater than 20 observations and most strong.
Yeah.
Well, it is pretty good.
It's not strong.
It's not strong.
But this one is.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, so we need to use.
And final.
Always just.
And then.
So 0.
And it
What's X bar?
X bar is 0.3.
3.3.
Okay, so the P
What
value
was mu?
7, you get 7.3.
Zero.
You say so.
Then EDS cards.
Yeah.
I don't know how many are.
What's your P value?
7.4 times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very strong evidence.
Times 10.
So very specific.
But there's a difference.
In price.
Maybe it was in your, the other one was in your auction price, just like where you have
The
a price.
price, the card sold for.
So it must have been like,
It depends.
in prices between the past.
Yeah.
You're like, well, or first price.
You can just say it's like on average.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's like.
In auction prices.
Yeah, there's different prices. Oh, I can get to it. Okay, I don't get that above 0. Like, how do you explain that? Like, okay,
Contain zero.
like, how do you?
So that's 95% data. That's pretty.
Yeah.
It's enough data for one to
I think you're
zero.
supposed to tell.
Predict.
I don't understand how.
Oh, you know, there's a huge bar right to the whole.
Oh, we
Okay, but without looking at that, how do you tell?
Well, you have to look at it.
What's the relationship between a P value and a
P value is really close to zero.
It is.
Oh, so what does that tell you?
That, I don't know.
Oh,
So it tells you the areas of fails.
What were we testing?
so it tells you that we're rejecting the null hypothesis.
Which is
Which is 0,
zero.
so it should not contain it.
It should have been.
Because it's so close.
So it's gonna go to below. So for this one, we're not looking at.
I was saying, you need to be able to tell without colors. Okay. Sorry. So is that because it's positive? Right, your confidence interval is going to be centered at the because like here, it was negative, so. Yep.
So it would be above.
Yeah.
Because the p value is so close to.
Yeah. Zero comes to two, and so rejecting the null.
I just did.
Equal to zero.
Wait, that's my.
And then,
I'm wondering, so if it's centered around this.
okay, so evaluate this plus zero for, right? It really works for your mean, which means that there's strong evidence that there's a difference. So we're rejecting the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis is that the difference is zero.
But so close to zero.
No, because, but that's the p value, not the p.
Well, if it's
Oh,
centered
no.
around that, how could it not be in it? Yeah, I know.
So like the null, so null is saying that it's equal to zero. So if this is a big number and we're not rejecting, it's like, yeah, we think that the
It must
difference
be
is
in it.
zero. It's gonna contain zero. That's what we're saying. No, it's not equal to zero. That's incorrect.
Read that. No. Okay.
It's not, it's the opposite. Evaluate equals zero. It's not. It's still.
I mean, yeah, it's so small. And since the null hypothesis is zero, then that means that it shouldn't be.
Yeah, we should check this.
Yeah, because the one where it's all of the same. Did you just say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It looks like this is a number.
No, right.
You know, it's in.
No distribution center.
Differences of the original data. So that's the bottom graph on the TV.
And that's how we mean.
I just said no distributions. What was the?
Right.
We use team.
Yeah,
All right, 0.2409
0.98.
The second one is 0.527
It has to be in there.
That's 11 minutes.
Alright. Yeah, you guys saw, I saw, I switched to my, we'll see all the same thing.
I tried to do something else.
I mean, yours sometimes.
So, I don't, there's like, there's so many bars in it. It works perfectly fine. You just email it.
I think it's because it's not equal. That's what makes it.
We have.
Oh, but that's not like the same graph. Right? It has a bar graph. It's kind of like.
Yeah, it was just weird. It's just a bunch of data. So you
Well,
call
I have some.
I'm stupid. I haven't looked at.
Okay, what key value?
Yeah, what's that? What's that?
I got zero.
No,
And then
that's-
I had to be on.
Yeah.
And then I got it. Or approximately.
And then you find.
Oh, you use the mean from
Well, like when you, no, I'm great.
I use the only. Oh, two simple. Oh, no.
I'm saying my brain is setting not to work.
Yeah, and then you use the stats and then you just.
And you use, but you use the,
Team. Oh, not team, two simple team.
oh, okay.
It's just like when we.
Let me get my computer. I'm already, I'm just confusing myself. Can I ask you a homework question? Sure. Okay, so the one with the cash.
What is What's your?
When he said that, I was gonna say, does he do it like?
What is your?
Yeah, what's your parameter?
I don't know if it's correct. Grammar is new on average of. So teaching. Because like mine's the standard versus experimental.
Wait, what? I said.
I said, your long run average of.
Still high school.
Alright, is that counting of that? I think that's what people want me asking.
I think she's not this serious.
Did you get it? Well.
Theory of it. They did really good.
Yeah, I got 90%.
Yeah.
We're all gonna-
How many questions?
That would, yeah.
I don't even know. I don't even care.
I had to love my grades. And I'm-
You studied it, they only have the best.
That's actually not bad. Sorry.
Yeah,
Okay, well, like, I don't feel like that.
yeah, that's for campus.
We did that yesterday.
And don't you just have a? Have you ever used it?
Oh.
It's really for service. This, wait, the bottom is costing. Okay, whatever. I have to look at it, like, I have to see a visual for me to know. It's the, it's title.
I don't volume, yeah.
No, plus the insert.
Yeah, I said.
I like that. It's supposed to be
She didn't answer one. I know she didn't know for sure.
I have to, so that we know I have the confidence interval, like, just I asked. Kind of. If you scroll down on the directions, it gives you a broader, like, what you should.
How do you get?
No, it's like, okay, I have to. I have to say what type of confidence interval I use. Where's the confidence? If you confidence interval, explain your confidence. That's all.
What do you think?
Sarah's right on instructions.
It doesn't say to explain.
You go down.
Oh, the interpretation. Oh, but that's. Wait, are you talking about?
So, yeah. It gives you like a
Wait, if you're using that, we're using insert.
You know how she always says that.
What?
So like.
I put this map into the day it's too long.
It wouldn't be.
Oh, I just.
Yeah.
What is
I don't wanna do it tomorrow before class.
This is how mine was like. I used to study.
Yeah. I'm pretty good. Friday.
That's wrong, right?
That one, I think that's fine.
Dude,
How did you do it?
I want to take it. Because I think I'll be going around.
And then you have to have.
I've said so much. Come on.
So.
I was like, it's you.
I hope I do good.
It's like-
Okay, now I'm just like,
Yeah, I just wanted to know.
oh,
I mean, it might be saying upgrade. Okay, well, let's have to.
I think it's fine with you.
No, she said to not use.
Oh, she said like.
Yeah, not that this.
I could be like,
Are we
are you gonna do that?
What did you mean by answer? Cause I did this.
So if you do, insert equations. Yep. And then insert symbols.
So. Yeah. True.
There it is.
Oh, and then I do.
Do a subscript. Yeah, type it and then press space.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
I mean. I don't know, I guess it's like. You guys.
Yeah.
Okay, what do you?
So hard to show you like trying to know what.
Hopefully.
These, yeah, probably like, kind of.
Yeah.
Do you want me to test you?
Sure.
Okay. I have only worked through like halfway, because I have memorized 7 and half of chapter 8, but in chapter 9, which is not chapter 9. Chapter
What class are you talking about?
tomorrow. Wow.
Okay.
Not microbiome.
Yeah, I'm gonna look at that.
Oh, she moved.
Good.
15 to 16, which is the
Good.
so it's Monday or Tuesday. Not
next week.
Not
but
next week.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
it's like.
Good. Yeah.
Sunday, Sunday home.
See, these you kind of remember already.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to put non-public and then I go to the dash and like.
You can delete the.
How do you, oh, I guess I'm not shocked because you like memorize it.
I know, I like thought I could do it from like walking the. Cause I do it a lot.
Isn't it backslash and you?
No.
Pretty sure that's it. Yep. I pay attention, I'll see you guys roll.
It's fine, I already have my.
There you go.
Wait, how do you think?
Sorry, can I have them too?
Good job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get that today though. Yeah. Oh, normally I do it for that.
How do you?
Yeah, I
What?
What are you asking?
Three is a question.
Let's talk about the activity and then I can help you after class if you want. Come on. All right, so let's talk about this activity. So you use the matched pairs applet to compute the mean and standard deviation. Which value are you looking at from this applet. Sarah?
This one.
Yes, the mean and standard deviation of the differences down here. And this is also the graph that we're looking at to assess whether the data is strongly skewed. So up here, looking at the individual samples, those look fairly skewed, but the differences are actually pretty close to symmetric. So I would say that, yeah, doing a paired t-test looks like a really solid choice here. Looks like the validity conditions are very well satisfied. All right. What'd you get for a theory-based p-value? Table 4, what'd you get?
7.439 times 10 to the negative 7.
Did I get those decimals right?
Yep.
Cool. All right. A stylistic point here is that when your calculator gives you the answer as like E -7, please don't write that as E, because someone could confuse that with the number E that's used in math that's equal to like 2 point. Yeah. It's like 2.71828 ... So instead, write it in scientific notation as times 10 to the -7th in this case. All right. So based on that p-value, we're going to be rejecting the null hypothesis. So what is our conclusion in the context of the study? Table 3, what do you say for your conclusion?
There's very strong evidence that there's a difference between options.
Very strong. That there's a difference between the auction prices on average. I like to say on average here rather than saying there's a difference between the average auction prices, because we're not really testing the average auction prices, we're testing the average difference of auction prices. All right, so do you think that a 95% confidence interval for the mean of the differences is going to be above 0, below 0, or contain 0? Raise your hand for above 0. Very good. Why is it going to be above 0? Nettie? X bar is positive. And that's the center of the confidence interval. So remember way back when we started talking about confidence intervals, we said that confidence intervals that were theory-based had the form point estimate plus or minus a margin of error. And in this case, our point estimate is X bar, that's 0.384. That means that our confidence interval is centered at that point estimate. So our confidence interval is centered at 0.384. That means that it has to contain at least some positive numbers. How do you know it doesn't also contain 0? Mary?
We just rejected.
Right, we just rejected the null hypothesis, and the null hypothesis was that mu sub d equaled 0. So the p-value is less than 0.05. So we are at least 95% confident that mu sub d does not equal 0. Therefore, 0 is not in the 95% confidence interval. So when you're checking this, you can check the level of confidence and think about what level of significance corresponds to that. So a 95% confidence interval corresponds to a 0.05 significance level. So because our p-value was less than 0.05, our confidence interval is not going to contain the value from the null hypothesis, which was 0. But we can say a value that will be in the confidence interval. What is that? Table 2? The mean, yeah, 0.384. Because we just said that the confidence interval was centered at 0.384. So that means that 0.384 is in the confidence interval. And hopefully, when you use the t interval on your calculator to compute that 95% confidence interval, that agreed with your predictions from part 7. Questions about this activity? All right, thank you for your attention. I will see you tomorrow for our project workday.
Probably